The Seahawks have a new 11-man draft class, including a star-studded quarterback from the SEC. We're going to be taking a deep dive into all 11 picks. Now that we've had a chance to revisit all of them, we're going to look at each selection and how they fit in Seattle coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s who are tuning in, whether you're in Brooklyn, New York, or Issaquah, Washington. We appreciate each and every one of you. And no, we're not starting a couple minutes late because I was shaving my head, for those of you that are responding in the comments. Anyway, we've got 11 picks to break down on today's show. A loaded draft class with athletes, swagger, toughness. We can't wait to break it all down. Coming up here, courtesy of our friends over at Nissan. Make sure to check out the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada and stay tuned for the Armada draft pick of the week later in the show. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It might seem crazy that we are now 2 days removed from the NFL draft, and this is the first time that Rob and I have had a chance to break things down here on the show together, but I assure you that we are well prepared for this because, well, we basically broke down every pick when we were in the draft media room this weekend. So, Rob, we are well versed here, especially when it comes to the first round selection, which I just didn't think Gray Zabel was going to be there at number 18, to be honest with you, especially when Tyler Booker got picked by Dallas at pick 12. I thought for sure that Zabel was going to get swept up here in the next few picks because there were several other teams in ahead of Seattle that could use a guard. And fortunately for the Seahawks, he remained there at 18, and that made it a lot easier for John Schneider to not have to worry about the fact that he was having a tough time trying to trade down from 18 overall.
Yeah, I think that Gray Zabel, just look at him from a schematic standpoint, and it just looked like a hand and glove kind of a fit. And, you know, I think anybody who's been following the Seahawks very long knows that when those perfect selections very rarely actually come to fruition when you're drafting as late as number 18 overall. So I wrote an article on Fox Sports a couple of months ago about just looking at this from a perfection standpoint rather than mock draft standpoint. Who would be the perfect fit for each of the 32 NFL teams? And I highlighted Gray Zabel at that point. We both had listed Gray Zabel as in previous mock drafts. For this to actually come to fruition, I think was the big shocker. Not only that he was available, but that John Schneider would change his tendencies. You know, never in the previous 15 years in which he had been general manager had the Seahawks ever invested a top 100 selection in an FCS prospect. Gray Zabel, of course, while dominant at the Senior Bowl and at the Combine, didn't have the measurables in terms of his, how broad his shoulders are, how broad his hips are, that the Seahawks have typically prioritized in the past. That's when you look at what the coaches that the Seattle brought in from the New Orleans Saints, the Rick Dennisons, the John Bentons of the world, that they had typically drafted players and then moved them to different positions. It looks like that Gray Zabel is going to be stepping right into that left guard position, a position that he had played previously at North Dakota State, among all of the others, of course. So again, it almost was too logical to actually work out. And yet, in fact, it did.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And again, I looked at teams like Atlanta at 15, Cincinnati at 17. There were several teams in front of the Seahawks that I thought there's a really good chance that they're going to like Gray Zabel and they're going to take him. And then he remained on the board. And so the Seahawks get their man because it sounds like John Schneider, he made it very clear this was their number one guard they had on their big board. It wasn't Tyler Booker. He wasn't willing to talk about Booker when he was asked specifically about that, but he had Zabel at number one, and it makes sense because you're considering that he's a 99th percentile athlete. He scored a 9.9 on the relative athletic score out of 10 So he is a phenomenal athlete for the position. He's got great athleticism even as a tackle, but he's got shorter arms. This is a great fit for him where he can go in there and he can punish people. He likes to play physical football. He said his favorite play is A-gap power, which that got me excited because I know the Seahawks aren't going to run that a ton, but Clint Kubiak still mixes in some gap schemes occasionally. This guy can give you the athleticism you need to run your wide zone, but he also has the physicality and toughness as a former farm boy from South Dakota. He's going to bring that to you in the line of scrimmage. And what's fascinating, and look, John Schneider said the Seahawks are trying to trade back into the end of the first round, which you and I, during the draft, thought that might happen because Nick Emmanwori from South Carolina, the hard-hitting athletic safety, remained on the board heading into the late 20s. And he had basically the same draft grade that Gray Zabel did. He was the other player the Seahawks were considering at pick 18. And then to start off Friday, you get a couple picks in, the Titans are on the board, and then John Schneider moves up and he gets his guy. It feels like John Schneider got his guy in Gray Zabel and Mike McDonald got his guy in Nick Emmanwori, and he has now got that playmaking safety that really is still a ball of clay, even though he was extremely productive for the Gamecocks.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, Emmanwori has been incredibly productive, obviously against elite competition, so very different than Gray Zabel. To me, one of the things that is so exciting about him is just the positional versatility. I thought that it was telling that John Schneider on day two was, kind of talked about the fact that, as he was kind of cutting his teeth, so to speak, with the Green Bay Packers, that their general manager then, Ron Wolf, talked about, guys who are this athletic, why not try them at the cornerback spot? And then unprompted, Mike McDonald kind of mentioned some nickel responsibilities, some dime responsibilities, didn't shy at all from the conversation or from the comparisons to a Kyle Hamilton, to a Cam Chancellor, so there was no tempering the enthusiasm that was building with this. I mean, hell, John Schneider started off the conversation, again, day two post-draft conversation with, characterizing this as a historic day in Seahawks, drafting. So again, and there was such excitement about both of these selections and the rest of the selections that the Seahawks made in day two. And I kind of, just pull the curtain back a little bit here. I happened to get to the Virginia Mason Athletic Center hours before that the draft kicked off, just because I was, working with our buddy Ian Furness with Seattle Sports Radio 93.3. And so we were live at 1 o'clock. The draft didn't start until 4 o'clock that day. And as I was walking in, I happened to see John Schneider. And just kind of talk with him for a little bit in the hallway. And there was an excitement about him, Corbin, that in following the draft and with John Schneider specifically for the last 15 years, I very rarely saw this type of excitement. So it just led me to believe that the Seahawks might be willing to trade all the way up from number 50 early on. You and I talked about that possibility. And then again, just like we talked about there with Gray Zabel, it wasn't just the possibility of this. The Seahawks actually made it happen. And when you see Emmanwori and the range that he possesses, the physicality that he possesses, the ball skills, and not just creating interceptions, but then taking it back to the house when he gets those opportunities, it's really easy to see why the Seahawks are as excited as they are. And frankly, why I gave them the best draft grade for the entire class of any one of the 32 teams. That article's up at foxsports.com right now.
Both of these picks have the potential to be game-changing selections for the Seahawks. And I think you can look at this draft and say that there's a potential for this to be a game-changing draft. And those of our listeners that listen in daily, again, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you. You've heard us rail on drafts in the past. So this is not like it's a homer podcast. Like, we have railed on selections. I just had a really hard time when I was grading the picks, finding ones that I thought weren't really good selections. It just feels like they are getting the kind of guys, and Emmanwori is one of them, that fit the vision that Mike McDonald is looking for on this roster. I mean, Emmanwori is tough. He's physical. He is a turnover creating player with really good ball skills. He's a former converted corner, so he has played outside corner before, and you can see it in the way that he plays the game. He's got areas to improve. His instincts against the run, he takes bad pursuit angles sometimes. There are areas to clean up, but look, you can't teach a guy to throw a 103-mile-an-hour fastball, but you can teach a guy who can throw that to be more accurate or to be able to mix in a curveball. They can do that with Nick Emmanwori. And so I look at this guy with the production he's had and just the fact that he has been a great tackler. I mean, he's cut his missed tackles each of the last 3 seasons. He's got great ball production, not only gets picks, but returns them, as you said, to the house. Did it twice last year. And he hasn't blitzed much, and when he has, he's been effective. Mike McDonald, you have to believe, is going to do that more with this kid as well. And they don't have to rush him into the starting lineup with Kobe Bryant and Julian Love on the roster. He can be a sub-package player for a while as he gets his feet wet, but the expectations are through the roof, and he has set them very high for himself. He's been the one guy. I mean, I can't remember any player coming to Seattle since the Legion of Boom that has been like, you know what, we want to be the next Legion of Boom. It's always, we want our own thing. He just point blank said, we want to recreate the Legion of Boom. So there is a calm confidence, a quiet swagger to this kid. I think both these picks have a chance to be fantastic. And the idea that Seattle got 2 players they had the highest ranked at 18, they got both of them, that bodes really well for them heading into 2025 and beyond. When we come back, look, we've got a bunch more picks. We got 9 more selections to dive into. We're going to go to the rest of the day 2 picks and start looking at day 3 as well. That'll be coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The Armada Draft Pick of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. This week, we're highlighting the top pick from our draft, the one selection that truly stood out, the guy who showcased the strength and power to push the Seahawks forward as we look ahead to next season. This week's Armada clear-cut player of the week is Nick Emmanwori, the playmaking safety with a well-rounded skill set who dominated the best competition in college football in the SEC from his true freshman year on. Emmanwori offers the heavy-duty toughness and confidence that comes with the all-new Nissan Armada. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's why I think the Seahawks have a fantastic pick here in Nick Emmanwori. It's clear that our top draft pick is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It was a busy weekend at the Virginia Mason Athletic Center. We knew it was going to be. The Seahawks had 10 picks scheduled going into the draft, and yet John Schneider exits with 11 new players, 3 7th-rounders, 3 5th-rounders. But before we get to some of those 5th-rounders, we're going to talk about what else transpired on day 2. The Emmanwori trade was obviously a huge splash, going up from 52 to 35 to go get the playmaking All-American safety out of South Carolina. But after that point, John Schneider was not done with throwing curveballs. I will say this, Rob. I think pick 50 was more of a curveball than pick 92 was, because I just didn't see Seattle picking a tight end whose game was mostly predicated on being a pass catcher. And there's no mistaking it here. The potential has been seen on film from Elijah Arroyo. And yet at the same time, he's had a number of injuries. He's only had 1 year really that he's been healthy. And Miami didn't accentuate that athleticism very much within the confines of their offense. A lot of short and behind the line of scrimmage passes to him. But you can see what the Seahawks were enticed by when he did get his chances to test the seam. 7 of the 15 targets that he had on deep balls, he was able to reel in, and 3 of his touchdowns were on those plays. So you can see the smooth athleticism. He doesn't look like he's 6'5", 254. He runs like he's a big receiver. The Seahawks even hinted they might use him as a big receiver in this offense. So you can understand why you take the shot here at 52. It's just not a player who many draft pundits had that high on their draft board because of the injury history and, quite frankly, up to this year, the lack of production.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is entering this season, Elijah Arroyo had 11 total catches throughout his college career. And you mentioned the knee injury. That, to me, is one of the reasons why he was not in the top 50 on my particular board. Now, I didn't go to the Senior Bowl this year, which is something unusual for me. I've gone to 20 of them over the last quarter century here. So I typically do go to the Senior Bowl, and that's where Elijah Arroyo really kind of distanced himself from the rest of the senior tight ends in this draft class, Corbin, just because he not only was blocking at the line of scrimmage in a traditional tight end role, catching the short to intermediate passes, showing the deep speed, to be able to attack down the seam. He also was being asked to move outside and to play almost like a wide receiver, especially at the goal line, where he was showing his ability against cornerbacks to be able to get open, to be able to use that 6'5" frame. And the excellent timing on his leaping ability to be able to pluck the ball at its highest point. Exactly what you wanted an receiver, of course, that being the position that DK Metcalf played for the Seahawks, to be able to do. And that's the thing, is that it's kind of like Emmanwori before. Perhaps he's going to be able to play that big nickel cornerback spot. This is not a projection. He's already done it. The same thing with Elijah Arroyo. It's not a projection to ask him to play some receiver snaps. He's already done it. He just moves with such speed and grace for a big man that it just kind of leaves your jaw dropped. So again, I think that we have to kind of acknowledge the fact that Elijah Arroyo is coming off of an injury, marred college career. And so that, to me, is one of the reasons why I am a little bit nervous about this selection. Anytime you're playing, you're investing an awful lot, a top 50 selection in a player that has had some injuries, that's a little bit spooky. But the upside on him is immense. And you're going to hear me say that about several of the Seahawks draft picks, that there is spectacular upside here. And for a team like the Seahawks that obviously needs some help at the pass catcher position, I was ecstatic with the possibilities with Elijah Arroyo inserted into an offense that we know is going to feature the tight end. That's what Clint Kubiak has been doing throughout his entire coaching career in the NFL.
And as I mentioned, I will say this before we move on to the next pick. This is the thing I'm most excited about with Elijah Arroyo. He had one drop his entire college career. His drop rate was under 1%. So if you put the football in his zip code with those long arms, he is going to pluck it and reel it in. He is not a body catcher. This guy's a fluid, soft-handed pass catcher. And so that had to be another thing that absolutely stood out to the Seahawks. If he's healthy, this does have a chance to be a really good pick. In fact, it could end up looking like a steal because John Schneider says we saw top 15 talent there if he didn't miss all that time earlier in his career and he was healthy this past season. Going to pick 92, the Seahawks, this is really the sweet spot. And you were back on radio when this is going on, but ESPN's Brady Henderson and I were sitting there a couple picks before 92, and I had been tweeting out a few options there with defensive tackles and receivers, and then we both at the same time like, this might be a spot for Jalen Milroe, though. And so when the pick actually came in at 92, I was really not surprised because I thought he was going to be gone by that point. I thought early middle round for the third was probably where his floor was going to be at. And you still had Shedeur Sanders on the board. Quarterback just weren't going as quickly as I anticipated. And so Milroe was there at 92. And John Schneider and company, this was one where the scouts were fighting. They were going to be fighting tooth and nail. We need to go get this guy now. And you can understand why with the traits, the 4.39 speed, the cannon for an arm, outstanding kid that brings leadership and captain intangibles. They had a 30 visit and were just incredibly impressed by his maturity and the way he carried himself there. This is a player, and we've talked about this a lot, Rob. You can justify bringing him in as your third quarterback and keeping him on the roster because you can put him in for packages. And Mike McDonald made it sound very clear that he is going to get some of those opportunities. Maybe he's not Taysom Hill, not the same type of player, but they said, Sam Darnold will still get 90% of the snaps. That made it very clear that they don't have a plan here for Jalen Milroe to just stand on the sidelines the entire rookie season. They're going to find ways to get his athleticism on the field while he's developing as a quarterback behind the scenes to work on the areas of his game like pocket presence and reading defenses that are inconsistent for him coming into the league.
Yeah, as they should. I mean, because he's just that dynamic of an athlete. We have seen the way that the NFL has evolved. There was, 10, 20 years ago, it was rare to see mobile quarterbacks having a great deal of success. Now, if you don't have a mobile quarterback, you basically are eliminating some of the flexibility of your offense. So I just, again, this was a selection that did surprise me, even though we had talked about Jalen Milroe a lot. I just thought that the upside was so high that, of course, every NFL team acknowledges, it recognizes the impact that a guy with this type of athletic traits, not only the speed, the elusiveness, the strength as a runner, but also just he might have the strongest arm of anybody in this draft class. He, statistically is among the elite deep ball passers of the quarterbacks in this class, was heads and tails ahead of Shedeur Sanders in that regard, for example, or Quinn Ewers in that example, Dylan Gabriel, because some of the quarterbacks that I myself have been projecting with the Seahawks. Now, there is no question that they still need some development in terms of his anticipation. But at the same time, when you consider that Jalen Milroe had 4 different offensive coordinators during his 4 seasons in Tuscaloosa, then you can understand why he is not developed in that area just yet. But there are throws on tape where he does make precise passes on all of the staples of a traditional West Coast offense type of a scheme that Clint Kubiak is going to be using. So again, to me, this is the way I characterized it when, as you mentioned, that I was doing live radio when the selection came down, was, to me, this is just the ultimate lottery ticket. What's fascinating to me, Corbin, is I'm not so sure that the Seahawks actually would have made this selection if their first 3 picks had not gone exactly as they had gone. If Seattle had not been just kind of rolling, I use the expression rolling hot dice. If Seattle had not been using, rolling hot dice earlier in the draft, maybe if they had not been able to get a Gray Zabel, and now they are desperate for an interior offensive lineman, then I don't know that you can afford this luxury selection that, to me, Jalen Milroe is. But because of the things rolled the way that they did, then I thought that, hey, why not use this lottery ticket here, number 92 overall, to select this quarterback? And just see what you can do with this. Because obviously Sam Darnold is going to be your primary starter. But if you hit on Jalen Milroe, you have a possibility of having an MVP candidate, kind of a player, because I just see that type of upside. Obviously, Mike McDowell is, very used to preparing against a quarterback that has the running ability, given his time there with the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, we all know that, it can be incredibly frustrating from a defensive coach's perspective that when you do everything you're supposed to do to protect against the play call, and then you have a quarterback who was just able to extend the play, do some dynamic things, the way that Jaden Daniels did with the Washington Commanders a year ago. Josh Allen's MVP. Again, a big part of it is because of their mobility and their ability to create after the play that was called wound up, kind of falling apart. That, to me, is the upside that Jalen Milroe possesses. And I love the fact that you mentioned the intangibles of this young man. Sometimes people stereotype Alabama quarterbacks as, just being a guy, either who has intangibles or who has physical talent, but rarely has both. Jalen Milroe is a 2-time team captain. He is a guy with very, very high academic grades at Alabama as well. My goodness, he was a finalist for the William Campbell Trophy, which is the academic Heisman. So again, he has the intellect to be able to fit into a quality NFL offense as well. To me, the sky is the absolute limit with Jalen Milroe, and the Seahawks have the time to develop him rather than push him onto the field the way that we see so many young quarterbacks basically have their potential ruined by overeager NFL teams.
It feels like John Schneider was buying a lot of lottery tickets in the middle of this draft, but they were ones that I all thought were good investments. And if you look at the first pick in the 5th round, and we're going to bunch this in with Milroe and Arroyo, because to me, Rylie Mills, he's not a guy we talked about very much in the pre-draft process, even though he's a very Seahawky player. It's because he tore his ACL in January in the college football playoff. And my understanding, based on timelines, was his probably not middle of the season, maybe the entire year. You won't have him. He could have a red shirt his rookie season. In the early 5th round, though, you can do that. And that's what the Seahawks do. They pick a 291-pound player in Rylie Mills who has the positional flexibility, can move up and down the line. He's played edge. He's been a stand-up defender. He's played the 3-tech position, and he's got 92nd percentile get-off is what Nolan Teasley, the assistant GM, told us. So he has great burst coming off the line of scrimmage compared to his peers. And Seattle, that is a big part of their evaluation of defensive linemen. He plays with violent hands, and he had 7.5 sacks last year. And here's the really good news on Rylie Mills, Rob. He told us that he is way ahead of schedule. I have talked to a few other people that have knowledge of the situation. He has definitely started running, and we're only a little over 3 months after surgery. So he thinks he's going to be doing football stuff before training camp starts. If that is the case, and it maybe shouldn't be a surprise anymore, a lot of guys come back from ACL tears in 7 or 8 months in the NFL now. If Rylie Mills is able to do that, though, and he can come back early, even middle of the season in 2025, that could end up being a huge steal for Seattle, because I think if he was healthy, he would have been gone in the first 90 selections. To me, he's a Ty Robinson that maybe has a higher ceiling than what Robinson does. And there's been a little bit more consistent production, and we know how much the Seahawks liked him, how much you and I like Ty Robinson. Rylie Mills is a player that kind of have been forgotten because of the injury, but if he can play some this year, that is a really nice pick at 142.
Yeah, a great pick at 142. And, again, you just articulated a lot of the reasons to really love this kid. I'll mention another one. Notre Dame, of course, wound up qualifying for the national championship game, and Robbie Mills went down with an injury a couple of games before that. I just love the story of how he and his family literally rented an RV because he wasn't able to fly because of the surgery. They were worried about blood clots when you get up in the air that soon after a surgery. And so he and his family literally rent an RV and then drive all the way down to the national championship game just to follow to follow and support his teammates. That to me is exactly the type of just intangibles that you're looking for. The physical traits, if you watch the tape, I mean, he is absolutely a top 90 selection, as you said, a top 90 talent, as you said. But I think that to me, this is, again, one of the areas in which John Schneider and the Seahawks scouts absolutely hit it out of the park in this particular draft, because they recognize the fact that this draft is so damn deep at defensive tackles. There were going to be some very good ones fall down the board. They just happened to get one of the best all the way in the 5th round because you got the discount sticker of him coming off the injury. And again, because Seattle defensive line is already a team strength, then even if he does take that redshirt season, it's not a huge loss for the Seahawks, because in the 5th round, of course, it's not a huge investment. And again, he has the intangibles that you feel very confident that he's going to come back even bigger, stronger, and faster than he was prior to the injury.
When we come back, we've got 6 more day 3 selections that we are going to rapid fire fly through. And I know there's a couple of these guys in particular that were high on Rob's list that he's going to be excited to talk about. We're going to get to that coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena. And with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get your hands on playoff tickets, even when the demand is sky high. And prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer. Their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. That's right, 60% savings the day before attending sports, concerts, comedy, and theater events. The all-in pricing means you don't have to worry about surprise fees at checkout either. What you see is what you pay, and you can check out your views from your seat before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Man, John Schneider, day 3 was a whirlwind for all of us in the media room. There were like 2 or 3 sequences where I couldn't type fast enough to keep up with the news, whether it was trading Sam Howell to Minnesota, trading back twice, making 3 selections and like 25 picks, which in late in the 6th and 7th round, that means all three of them are going to be coming basically back to back with how fast those picks were flying in. So we are going to be using that kind of pace here to talk about these final 6 draft picks. And Rob, I'm going to give you the mic for pick number 166, which was acquired from the Browns in the second of 2 trade downs that happened early on day 3. And I know that this guy was much higher on your draft board than some people, and getting him in the 5th round, you were fired up about this pick. Tory Horton, the speedy receiver from Colorado State, falling right into Seattle's lap in the middle of the 5th round.
Yeah, Corbin, I was pounding the table for Tory Horton back in the 3rd round. To me, this is exactly the type of speed receiver that I've been kind of clamoring for. 6'3", 196 pounds. He just shortly after his own knee procedure, he goes to the combine, ran in the low 4.4s. I believe when healthy, he's going to be running in the 4.3s. He is not only as a wide receiver does he show promise, but also as a return man. He had 3 punt returns, all of them coming in different years over his college career. He was productive at Nevada. He winds up going to Colorado State, where he was easily the best player on the field for the Colorado State squad. So to me, this just was, fulfilling another need for the Seahawks at a position of extreme value.
Now let's go to the last 5th rounder, and this is the one even I gave this a C+ in my draft grades, and we're going to dive into that as we get deeper in the week. But on Emerald City Spectrum, I've got about 4,000 words of grades on all these picks, and Robbie Ouzts, the tight end, now turning to fullback for Alabama. This is not taking a shot at the player at all. Everybody that listens to our podcast knows how much I love fullbacks, and I'm fired up that Seattle went out and got a 274-pound tight end to convert to fullback. I see a Patrick Ricard type player here. When you turn on the film, he's that kind of physical guy. And oh, by the way, he had 2 touchdown catches last year. So you can get the football to him. He's not going to be a high volume pass catching target, but he's got that tight end background where he's actually got pretty smooth hands when he's had opportunities at Alabama. And I gave this pick a C+ just mainly because of where they made the selection. I still saw some really good corners. There were still some good interior defensive linemen that were on the board at this point. There were some decent linebackers, off-ball linebackers. And so I was a little surprised at the time that they went late in the 5th round for Robbie Ouzts. But you got to understand what they are emphasizing here. The more I looked on it, it's a statement pick. Mike McDonald and company saying, we are going to get this run game going. We are going to have a physical offense that's going to run a lot of 2-back offense, and we are going to get this big guy that didn't run fast, but he has 19-mile-an-hour GPS during games, so he was faster on the field with pads on. And oh, by the way, had really fast short shuttle and 3-cone drill time. So this guy has really good change of direction skills, 274 pounds, and he's mean, he's nasty, he's got an awesome mustache. This pick is, quite frankly, I gave it a C+ because of the positional value, but I still love it. End of the 5th round, getting this guy in here, and it's about the mentality. It's about the vision they have for this offense. And going to the 6th round, we didn't think we were going to be talking 6th rounders, Rob, but Bryce Cabledue from Kansas, this is the 2nd pick, acquired a trade down with the Browns, 192. John Schneider was not going to go an entire round without making a pick. So he found a way to get a selection in the 6th, and Cabledue is actually, based on relative athletic score, he's actually a better athlete than even Gray Zabel is. And he was a 4-year starter as a tackle, now going to slide inside. This might be the wild card selection that Seattle made on day 3.
Yeah, both Ouzts and Cabledue, frankly. I mean, Ouzts is a player that, I had a little bit lower as well. But at the same time, as you said, I think that it was a statement move. And I thought that John Schneider kind of hinted at making some moves like this. At the end of the day, too, he said that there was a couple of guys that they were targeting. And that, to me, suggested that they were willing to reach, at least the perception of reach, to make sure that they got their guy. And so, to me, Robbie Ouzts is absolutely their kind of a guy. And with Cabledue, same kind of a thing here. I just think that Seattle wanted to make sure that they positioned themselves to get a player that, of course, had been, as you mentioned, brought in on a visit, is highly athletic player, is a 4-year starter. And speaking with some scouts that were going through Kansas, Corbin, Corbin. There was, of course, Dominic Pooney had been the tackle for Kansas, wants to go in the San Francisco 49ers, was very impressive this past season as a rookie. Those scouts that went through Kansas argued that Cabledue actually was even better than Pooney was. And so to me, I just thought that this would make all the sense in the world that Seattle would make these two selections, just considering the fact that fullback obviously was an area of concern for this club, and you knew that offensive line as well. The player that I really want to highlight here for a moment, because I think that he is getting kind of overshadowed by all the excitement about all these other players here, is Damien Martinez, the running back for Miami that previously had starred at Oregon State. And I say starred because he only played 3 seasons, but in all 3 of those seasons, he was electric. And this is a guy, he's a big back at 6 foot and 220 pounds. He runs with power. He's got better speed than his low 4.5 40-yard dash time would suggest. He runs fast. And when you and I were talking about some of the backs that really fit in the zone blocking system, wide zone, I really think that this kid shows vision. He shows enough burst, again, to be able to kind of take advantage of those cutback lanes. And again, he will put defenders on their backside with his physicality. So again, this is another, I wasn't a huge fan of the idea of the Seahawks investing a draft pick at running back, because as you mentioned, there still was some good corners out there. There were some good nose guards out there. But at the same time, this to me was just too much, value to pass up at this point in the draft.
I had Martinez as my 14th ranked running back in this class, which is pretty good considering how much talent that there is in this class. Ran in the low 4.5s at 217 pounds. So he's got pretty good wheels for being a bigger downhill back. And look, I'm not going to make the beast mode 2.0 comparisons like the player himself did. To me, that is, maybe if he goes out and does that, if he does, great. But I see similarities in the sense that Marshawn Lynch was that downhill bullying running back that had the ability to run zone at a very high level because of his vision. And I think you can see some of that in Damien Martinez's game. And I love the fact that he averaged over 4.5 yards per carry after contact last year for the full season. This guy breaks a lot of tackles and he gets a lot of yardage dragging guys. So it's another one of those statement picks. We are going to bring in somebody that's going to make our offense much more physical and tougher for opponents to deal with. We get 2 more selections to cover here. Now, I'll let you have an opportunity to talk about Mason Richmond because of his background as a left tackle in the Big Ten. I want to talk about the guy that is, to me, the best value pick in this entire draft. And it is not because he was the last selection. Certainly that helps. But I had a late 4th round grade on Ricky White III out of UNLV. And I don't care if he ran a low 4.6 at his pro day workout. He ran in the mid 4.5s a couple weeks later. And that is what I see. I see a guy that has really good quickness. He can win downfield. And what I love most about Ricky White, he is a football player. To me, he is one of the 3 best blocking wide receivers in this entire draft class. You turn on the tape, you can tell Ricky White cares a lot about blocking, which Clint Kubiak had to get excited about. 2,000-yard season. He had almost 1,500 yards for UNLV. And let's face it, UNLV did not have great quarterback play the last 2 years. But Ricky White made his quarterbacks look pretty darn good. He blocked 4 punts in 2024. Last season, blocked 4 punts. You could argue non-kicker punter that he was the best special teams player in the entire country with that, because he also had a punt return for a touchdown on one of just 4 attempts. He is a football player. He just does damage. He is kind of soft-spoken, but he goes, I guess, the job done. Oh, by the way, he's got 3 game-winning catches in his career, too. So he's got the clutch gene. I was stunned he was there, and I bet you John Schneider was like, how is this dude still here? This kind of feels like Kenny McIntosh a couple years ago in terms of that talent of a player just somehow being there at the tail end of the 7th round.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, it's a player that we talked about when we were doing our wide receiver kind of focus, a couple of weeks ago and leading up to the draft. And I'll jump back in there with Mason Richmond real quick. I mean, this is a 4-year starter at the left tackle position for Kirk Ferentz and the Iowa Hawkeyes, Corbin. And you and I both are huge fans of the Iowa Hawkeyes and the way that they constantly churn out NFL prospects, especially along the offensive line. Look, Richmond is a similar kind of story as Ricky White III. That he is not the most dynamic tester But at the same time, he is technically sound. He is as dependable and tough as they get. I think that he has the possibility to be able to remain outside at tackle because of his clean technique. I also think that there's a good chance that he may wind up ultimately being moved inside to guard. Corbin, I think that all Seahawks fans were just hoping in this class that Seattle would address their offensive line. I think that they got 3 players here that made guard a weakness into a possible strength. And the fact that they were able to do that and get talents like Elijah Arroyo, Jalen Milroe, Nick Emmanwori. I mean, this is just spectacular. Damien Martinez again. And then, of course, the 2 wide receivers that we just talked about. Again, that's why the Seahawks deservedly are receiving A's from basically everybody when it comes to evaluating the 2025 draft.
And I'll just throw this out here. I actually think that there's a better chance Richmond goes to center than guard. I know he hasn't played it, but he has been snapping. He told us this on his conference call, that he has been snapping daily for a couple years in their offensive line work. So he's a guy, he's intelligent, he is experienced, he understands the game. And he had good agility testing scores. He was slow in the 40, but he had really good agility testing scores. So he was one of the top zone blocking tackles in college football last year too. So I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that he could play that center position. So maybe you add him to that competition with Jalen Sundell and Oluwatimi. That was the other thing. This draft just had so much positional flexibility. So many of these guys can move. Even Ricky White has played slot on the outside. He's played in the backfield before. They've got guys that have that versatility. Again, they're just checking off all those boxes that encompass that vision that Mike McDonald has for the Seahawks. As always, you can follow us on X and Blue Sky. I'm at X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. He's on X at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, we are going to be looking at the first half of Seattle's draft more in depth, and we're going to be dishing out some grades for those picks, and we'll have more in-depth statistics and analytics behind all these selections as well as we continue to unpack this really fun draft class for the Seattle Seahawks. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.